Hi everyone, it's H again. I hope you are super well. This is the latest installment of my video diary series, chronicling things that I have read, lessons I have learned and I'm learning. And broadly, it's an endeavour in doing something fixedly, determinedly, on a consistent basis that enriches me far beyond the initial activity itself. So I don't believe you have to read every day. I do it because I love it. But I do believe in coming across material that was created by somebody else with deep consideration and thought, and one's ability to paddle one's feet in those thoughts is incredibly enriching and an exciting endeavour. And so I would always recommend somebody who says that they are not into reading is just to take a little time just to peruse the bookshelves of a physical store, because maybe you might come across something that really piques your attention and you just haven't found your book. And for the ones who really do not enjoy the process of reading, I'm sure there are many other wonderful ways in which you take in information. And actually, I do also love to listen to talks. I do watch lectures and individuals being interviewed. And so it's a really incredible age in which one can take in information and learn solitary, but also then engage with others in the exchange of ideas and also having to test and prove our ideas. So all things count, is what the long-winded way of saying is, even if you do not read. For this instalment, I want to touch upon a work that I wouldn't have typically read, but somebody had said to me it was a favourite book of his, so an acquaintance of mine, and they'd actually read it nearly 3 times over, and was something he considered rereading many times going forward also. And this really piqued my interest because there are very few books that I have reread entirely. So there are certain books like Wuthering Heights I try to potentially read every Christmas. It has this dark romance, this bleakness of the setting. Being in England, I get enough bleakness in winter, but I need to read it as well for some reason. And there are other books and writers that I do love to dip into, partially once I've fully read them, but I won't reread entirely, simply because I want to consume other content and other books in their entirety. But then again, I do really enjoy and savour when I return back to the books as well. And so that was the reason for me being piqued, because if someone could reread something 3 times and it still caught their attention, I thought there must be something compelling there that could also draw me in as well. And so the book is Just Kids. You can see that, by Patti Smith. And it's obviously a biography by Patti Smith, and she has written a few different works. This is about her early foray into freedom and experimentation as an artist once she left home and moved to New York, and her discovery of by Robert Mapplethorpe, who becomes a dear friend, which seems such a limiting word in the instance of the relationship Smith and Mapplethorpe shared, but a deep friend who rescues her from this terrible pursuer, so to speak, of this man who wants to go on a date essentially with Patti Smith when she's really young and ingenue, working in a bookstore, living in her romantic world. And Mapplethorpe comes at the right time, rescues Patti Smith and acts as her protector, and actually thereafter does become it, and she becomes his protector. And actually it's a book that really surprised me, because Patti Smith is a name that I do know for contemporary culture. I hadn't heard her music, I hadn't read her poetry, I hadn't read her writing, but I had come across her at an event that I went to at the Fondation Cartier, which is the art exhibition space which was founded by Cartier 20 years ago, and they host contemporary artists in that space. And I had the good fortune to go there in a past life, and Patti Smith was performing. And I went in totally blind, so I knew there was some excitement, some fervour around her being there. And I simply went as someone completely objective. I hadn't, as I said, experienced her, and I hadn't ahead of time, which is unusual for me, researched or looked into her. And I went, and it was a beautiful evening, actually, of Patti Smith reciting her poetry and also performing her music in collaboration and in conversation with that written word. And it was honestly incredibly moving. I cannot tell you now my recollection of the exact poetry or the songs, but the power of her voice was so moving. There was a deep emotive quality, and she almost struck these series of chords inside of me, which went to sort of universal feelings of deep love, of empathy, a type of warmth. And it wasn't so much as it was moving, but it really sort of took in my whole being, and I just felt time stood still. And it's really surprising because, again, it's not a genre of music that I'm especially familiar with, and I wasn't familiar with her in her time. I wouldn't be. I wasn't around in the time where she was very, very popular. And so that was my only experience of Patti Smith, seemingly an incredibly lucky one, considering the degree of devotion there is to Patti Smith. So reading this book was my second experience of her. And it is a marvellous story, and it's told with a deep sense of nostalgia, but without the connotations of regret in any way. It's just a beautiful ode to youth and hope, and also covering that spectrum of life where one is haunted by one's personal demons. You know, when you're in your 20s, what decisions should you make? Who should you pursue in terms of your life partner choices? You know, who are your friends? And above all, the biggest question for Patti and Robert is how best to become the creators that they feel they are already inside. These artists who live in a bohemian manner in the 60s and 70s in New York, which is incredibly different to the New York we find today. In Patti Smith's version, it is still very murky, and there is an underlying sense of violence and the unknown, and all sorts of walks of life are still to be found on the main streets of New York, yet to be pushed out into the suburbs and certain neighbourhoods. And they have several run-ins with poverty, with the disappointment, and all throughout the web that ties the whole thing together is this unquenching sense that they are both moving towards something greater within them and together. And this is art with a capital A. And Robert Mapplethorpe, throughout this, he struggles, various demons to do with his beliefs, in his growth towards atheism from his upbringing as a Catholic, and his experimentations with drugs, which was commonplace at that time and in those circles of deep creativity, but also deep experimentation. And with Patti Smith, it's the same. It's the journey she undertakes in discovering her voice as an artist, what form it should take. I mean, she knows what she wants to say. There are touches throughout this, and there is some sort of a maternal sense to her art. It's very generative, and it comes across most overtly in her caretaking of Robert Mapplethorpe, but then it does over time transpire into her art and her abundant creativity. There is just one line that I want to quote. This is where Robert's not feeling terribly well, and Patti takes care of him. But it's the tenderness with which she tends to him, and with the lack of judgment. I brought Robert a little food. It was the first he had ever eaten since my return. I recounted my dealings with Scribners and Bard. We were amazed at how much had happened, retracing our small odyssey from calamitous to calm. Then he fell silent. I knew what he was thinking. He didn't say he was sorry, but I knew he was. He wondered, as he rested his head on my shoulder, if I would have been better off if I hadn't come back. But I did come back. In the end, we were better off. Now, this is a part in the book where Patti decided she needed time away from New York. She wanted time away from the circle she was in. And obviously that meant time away from Robert Mapplethorpe. They shared accommodation, spent pretty much all hours together. And she decides that her work and her life hasn't finished yet in New York, and there is still much to do. But it's that tenderness between the two and this acknowledgement that the caretaking that exists between these two individuals is almost something bigger than them. And that in nurturing Robert in his health and is also his mind is that final catalyst which allows him to be the creative individual he grows into, the photographer, the provocateur in many ways. And I think that's sometimes undervalued in the creative process. It's nice to have somebody who champions you, who supports you, who believes in you, yes. But also that tenderness that comes when one feels either wounded or lost is just as important. That pillar, it counts just as much as that fervour and excitement and energy. And we'll find moments in this where the humanity of a group of people, a bunch of what one would say creative misfits, come together because they believe in a different world. And they're sharing ideas on music, on art, on dance, on photography, and just trying to figure things out. Of course, we have Studio 54 and Andy Warhol and his coterie of creatives at this time too. And it's nice to have a personal story of Patti Smith woven amongst the glamour and the pop culture that we see in art in galleries today. There's something so heartwarming too about the relationship between Mapplethorpe and Smith when they talk about the various apartment rooms or hotel rooms they occupy. Everywhere they go, they have this almost profusion of cut-out flowers and postcards and magazine excerpts and prints, which they create almost as if it were a sacred altar. And that for them is a piece of who they are, they take with them wherever they go. And the ritualistic manner with which they approach the accruing of these small talismans that they pick up where they go and give each other these small gifts but with powerful meaning is my key takeaway from having read this, as well as just the elegiac tone and softness of Patti's handling of life's great challenges, her malleability, which allows her to flower into things she's always been but couldn't find the voice for. The thing I take is that the need for ritual in day-to-day life, in accruing the small habits, and not habits of high-performing individuals, and not habits around behaviour, but certain things that one does repetitively with meaning. And sometimes the meaning is just based on feeling. It's not about an exact return. It's not something one can record and keep a tally of, but a type of ritual that keeps the soul, or whatever essential part of us, the unconscious spirit that we have, it keeps us tethered somehow in using our body and minds in one act together, and the bringing of small things that we love into a universe that we can see, and we partake in behaviours regularly, keeps us close and anchored in an uncertain world sometimes. And so when I look around at certain things that I own, and I am conscious of what I bring into my life and make sure I exact value from something if I do bring it in. But I do have items including, a pebble I've taken from a place which I probably shouldn't have done, an acorn from the first sort of week of autumn, small things that I have accrued, or things that friends have given me, whether they've been to Japan and I have a small keyring, or a good friend who's been to South Korea and has given me a bookmark. I just collect a few of these things, and the use of these, the interaction with them, that ritual behaviour of looking outside of myself to other things, just to reflect back as a little part of me, but other people too, I just find a really wholesome thing. And I understand the value in owning less and just taking more meaning from it. I really understand that. But I don't want to have an environment for myself which takes everything out just because it doesn't have a clear line to utility. It doesn't have a clear use. And so that's my takeaway. Just having some ritual, some things that I will observe because they just fulfill a part of me based on feeling. The ritual of collecting a few choice items from friends or my own travels that I will have out, I will have displayed beautifully and carefully. I will interact with these objects and they will bring something to me as I see them, part of my day-to-day structure. This is what Patti Smith has given me in reading Just Kids, and I confess it's such a gift that I too hope to reread this in future times ahead.